I was woken up at 6 a.m. by the sound of a bulldozer in my backyard. A construction crew was digging a trench, right through my property. And get this, they said it was for the HOA's new water pipeline. The kicker? I don't even live in the neighborhood. At first, I thought I was dreaming. There was no way an actual backhoe was clawing up my land at the crack of dawn. But when I stumbled outside in nothing but boxers and bed hair, there it was. Heavy machinery, orange-vested workers, and a guy holding blueprints like he owned the place. And when I asked what in the name of municipal madness they were doing, he said, without blinking, just laying down the new water line for the Willow Creek HOA. Should be done in a couple days. I blinked back deadpan and replied, "That's amazing, considering this isn't Willow Creek. This is my land." Now, before we get to the juicy part, let me rewind a bit. My name's Tyler. I'm a land surveyor by trade, which will become hilariously ironic very soon. A few years ago, I inherited 10 acres of dusty, underdeveloped land just outside a fancy suburban development called Willow Creek Estate. It's the kind of neighborhood where everyone's lawn is suspiciously the same shade of green, and they fine you if your Christmas lights stay up a day past New Year's. Basically, a Stepford suburb run by a militant homeowners association that takes itself way too seriously. I never joined the HOA because, say it with me, I don't live in the neighborhood. My land is adjacent, legally separate, and completely under my control. I mostly used it for storage, weekend camping, and occasionally to get away from humans, especially the kind who care deeply about mailbox uniformity. But somehow, someway, these HOA people got it in their heads that my land was just available. 2 weeks before the bulldozer incident, I spotted a couple of guys with tripods and clipboards walking around the edge of my property. Naturally, I went over to ask what they were doing, because I don't appreciate strangers trespassing on my land like it's a public park. They gave me some vague answer about utilities and assessments and improving infrastructure. I figured they were just surveying for a new development on the other side of Willow Creek and didn't think much more of it. Rookie mistake. Cut to the morning of the Great Dig, and I'm standing on my own property, in my own backyard, watching an uninvited trench get deeper by the minute. I told the foreman to shut everything down immediately. His response? "You'll need to take it up with the HOA. The absolute audacity." I stared at him for a full 5 seconds, then deadpanned, "And if I started digging a pool in your living room, should I take it up with your landlord?" He shrugged, clearly not paid enough to care. That afternoon, I received a visit from Janice. Every HOA has a Janice. Perfect hair, perfectly pressed pantsuit, and the personality of a spreadsheet. She pulled up in a shiny SUV, stepped out with a clipboard like she was about to conduct an audit, and said, "We understand there's been some confusion." "Oh, I'm not confused," I said. "You guys are literally building a pipeline through land you don't own." Janice gave me the kind of smile dentists use before drilling without anesthesia. "Well, the plans we had showed this section as part of the utility corridor. It must be a clerical issue. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully." "You mean like peacefully stopping construction and getting off my land?" I asked. She laughed, then said, "Let's not be dramatic. It's just dirt, sweetie. It's not like you're using it. Now, I've had a few people talk down to me in life, but there's a special kind of rage that bubbles up when someone calls you sweetie while illegally trenching your property. Still, I kept my cool. You don't win by yelling. You win by letting people think they're in control, right before you pull the rug out from under them. I told Janice I'd talk to my lawyer and get back to her. She nodded like I was a toddler pretending to be a grown-up and drove off with the smug satisfaction of someone who has never been held accountable for anything. She had no idea I was already making calls. I wasn't just angry, I was intrigued. Because here's the thing. As a land surveyor, I don't just understand property boundaries. I live and breathe them. I know how easements work, how rights of way are granted, and how utterly screwed someone is when they build without a legal agreement. And I had one very juicy advantage. I knew for a fact that no easement had ever been filed on my land. That pipeline wasn't just an overstep, it was a full-on legal disaster waiting to happen. Over the next few days, I played it cool. I let the construction continue while I gathered documents, called in a favor with a friend at the county office, and reread every clause in the property deed I inherited. And just like I thought, no right-of-way, no permissions, nothing. They'd built a pipeline straight through my land on nothing but assumptions and entitlement. But then I stumbled onto something even better. It turns out that the underground water source the HOA was tapping into? It ran directly under my land. And better yet, I held the senior water rights for the entire area, something that hadn't mattered for years because I didn't use the water. But now? Now it was everything. I didn't say a word to Janice or the HOA. I didn't send an angry letter. I just smiled, waited, and made one quiet call to the regional water district. And while the bulldozers finished up and the HOA newsletter boasted about their brand new HOA-owned water pipeline built to serve the entire community, I was filling out paperwork to do something they never saw coming. They thought they'd just bulldoze my land and walk away with a shiny new utility. But what they didn't realize was that I now held the valve to their entire water supply. And I was just getting started. The thing about revenge is that it tastes better when it's cold, calculated, and signed off by a water rights attorney. After Janice drove off with her smirk and condescension, I spent the next few days assembling what I like to call my petty power portfolio, a delightful little folder filled with property deeds, water rights documents, and aerial land surveys. If this were a superhero origin story, this would be the montage where the nerdy guy discovers he's been bitten by a radioactive lawyer. I wasn't just going to stop the HOA. I was going to make them pay, literally, for every drop of water they tried to steal. First, I confirmed my suspicion. The HOA had absolutely no legal easement to run a pipeline through my land. Not now, not ever. The Willow Creek subdivision map might have looked impressive on glossy paper, but when I overlaid their supposed utility corridor onto official county plat maps, the result was obvious. They were operating on pure fiction. Whoever approved this pipeline project either didn't do their homework or just figured no one would care. And honestly, they were probably right, until they picked the wrong nobody. But here's where it gets fun. See, the aquifer they were tapping into isn't just some random hole in the ground. It's part of a regional groundwater basin with very specific rules. And I, by sheer stroke of luck and inheritance, held senior water rights for a large section of that basin. That meant any water extracted from that system, even if it was technically under their development, was subject to my approval, because the flow started on my land. Basically, I controlled the faucet, and they had just hooked their entire community up to my plumbing. I scheduled a meeting with the local water district, showed them my documentation, and asked a few hypotheticals. Hypotheticals like, if someone builds a pipeline through my land without permission and starts using water from an aquifer I own rights to, would I be able to restrict their access? The answer was a very satisfying yes. In fact, not only could I restrict access, I could formally register a block on any new draws from the aquifer within a specific zone, pending legal review. They even offered to send out a hydrologist to inspect the situation, just to be thorough. I left that office with a spring in my step and a thick envelope of forms that would make Janice break out in hive. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to touch the pipeline. I didn't have to sue them. I didn't even have to yell. All I had to do was file a few forms, wait for the HOA to hook up every home to their shiny new water system, and then, like a wizard pulling the plug from the bathtub, I could drain them dry with one signature. While I worked behind the scenes, the HOA was busy celebrating their accomplishment. I got my hands on one of their newsletters, and let me tell you, the level of smug radiating off that piece of paper could power a small village. A greener Willow Creek is just around the corner, it read. Thanks to our state-of-the-art irrigation project, Homeowners can look forward to luscious lawns and improved property values. I clipped that newsletter and taped it to my fridge like a war trophy. But the real kicker? They still hadn't realized they were on my land. At least, not officially. I kept expecting some kind of follow-up, some last-ditch attempt to negotiate or at least acknowledge what they'd done. But Janice and her goons must have convinced themselves that everything was fine. Maybe they figured I wouldn't actually do anything. Or maybe they were just used to steamrolling people who didn't wear blazers to breakfast. I stayed quiet, which wasn't easy. Every time I saw that trench slicing across my property, I wanted to grab a shovel and fill it in myself. But no. Patience. Precision. Petty perfection. I let them finish construction. Let them hook up the sprinklers and fill their decorative fountains. Let them think they'd won. It was a delicate game of chicken, and I knew exactly when to swerve. By late spring, I had everything in place. The hydrologist came out, confirmed the illegal access, and submitted his report to the district. I filed my formal complaint. I submitted the cease and desist paperwork with a lawyer's signature and a very polite tone. I even took photos of the pipeline cutting through my property, just in case they tried to claim ignorance. Then I waited. Summer rolled in like a heat wave from hell, and with it came peak water demand. Lawn sprinklers kicked into overdrive, kiddie pools appeared like mushrooms after rain, and the HOA sent out a reminder email about responsible water usage. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. That very same week, I submitted the final form. The one that triggered a district-wide notification to all unauthorized users of the aquifer. Specifically, users pulling from unauthorized pipeline systems. Within 72 hours, the flow dropped to a trickle, and the complaints started pouring in. Residents flooded the HOA with angry emails. Lawns turned yellow. Sprinklers sputtered. People were furious. The HOA board scrambled to respond, but they couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. After all, the system had worked just fine a few weeks ago. They called contractors, plumbers, even city officials. Nothing helped. Then I got a visit. Janice showed up again, this time looking slightly less polished. Gone were the pearls and crisp white blouse. This time she wore sunglasses and carried a folder thick enough to choke a goat. She didn't smile. Didn't say hello. Just got right to it. "We need to talk," she said. "Oh, now we need to talk?" I said, sipping coffee on my porch. "What happened to it's just dirt, sweetie?" She ignored the jab. "There's been an unfortunate situation regarding the water system." "Unfortunate is one word for it," I replied. "Illegal is another." She tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, that they acted in good faith, that the HOA had relied on outdated map. I let her ramble until she finally asked, "Is there any way we can resolve this quietly?" That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stood up, walked to the edge of the property where their pipeline crossed, and pointed. "That trench? That's trespassing. That water? That's mine. And that fine." I pulled out a copy of the cease and desist letter. "That's $500 per day, retroactive to the day you started digging." Her face went pale. I leaned in, smiled, and said, "But I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you a chance to make things right." And then I told her my offer. Not to stop the complaints, not to remove the fines, but to sell them back access to the water they stole, for a price. What I didn't tell her was that I already had a backup buyer lined up. A local farming co-op looking for a reliable source, with better lawyers and deeper pockets than the HOA ever dreamed of. Janice left that meeting looking like someone had just run over her dog. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the HOA was about to face the most expensive sprinkler system in neighborhood history. But just when I thought I had them pinned, something unexpected happened. A resident, a guy named Mitch, showed up at my property gate. He wasn't angry. He looked nervous. And what he told me? Let's just say the HOA's little pipeline wasn't their first land grab. When Mitch showed up at my property gate, I half expected another round of angry finger-pointing and clueless entitlement. But instead of storming up like Janice did, he hesitated, knocked politely on the gatepost, and waited like a guy delivering bad news to a sleeping dragon. I opened it cautiously, coffee in hand, ready to deliver my now polished speech about land rights and trespassing fees, but before I could say a word, he spoke up. "Look, man, I'm not here to argue. I just want to talk." That threw me off just enough to let him in. Mitch was mid-40s, tired-looking, the kind of guy who probably spent weekends fixing his own sprinklers and watching football while muttering about taxes. He didn't look like a classic HOA foot soldier. More like a reluctant participant who got caught in the middle of a bureaucratic disaster. He stepped up onto my porch, glanced nervously toward the trench, and said, "I heard what happened. About the pipeline. About the water. I'm not gonna lie, half the neighborhood thinks you're the devil. The other half wants your lawyer's number." I smirked. "Well, at least I'm dividing the community equally." He gave a weak laugh, then got serious. "I wanted to tell you something because I think it's only a matter of time before more people start talking. This pipeline thing? It's not the first time the HOAs played fast and loose with land boundaries." That piqued my interest. I leaned against the porch rail and nodded for him to go on. Mitch explained that about a year before the pipeline fiasco, the HOA had restructured a walking path through what was supposed to be community-owned greenbelt space. Only, it turned out that some of that greenbelt actually belonged to a retired couple named the Harpers, who owned a sliver of unincorporated land right along the southern fence line. The HOA had bulldozed part of their backyard without so much as a courtesy notice. I asked what happened to the Harpers. Mitch sighed. They were in their 70s. Didn't want to fight it. They got a small settlement, but the HOA made them sign a non-disclosure. Most people think the Harpers gave up the land willingly. That made my stomach twist a little. I'm all for revenge and consequences, but stealing from people too old or too tired to fight back, that's a different level of sleaze. Suddenly, my little war with Janice felt a lot bigger. If they'd done it before, they'd do it again. And I wasn't just protecting my land anymore. I was about to be the brick wall these HOA vultures slammed into. I thanked Mitch for the intel and offered him a beer. He declined, but before leaving, he added, "Most of us just want working sprinklers and peace. We didn't vote for this pipeline. We didn't even know it went through your land. Janice, she kind of does what she wants." That much I already knew. The thing was, Janice was starting to feel the cracks. After our little talk on the property line, I'd given her a formal proposal. I'd allow water access through my land, legally, this time, for a one-time fee of $250,000, plus a public apology delivered at the next HOA meeting. Predictably, she laughed in my face. But within a week, her laugh had turned into panicked phone calls. The community was in an uproar. Lawns were turning into crunchy yellow death zones. Garden clubs were threatening to mutiny. One guy apparently had to cancel his 4th of July party because his pool didn't fill. The neighborhood Facebook page was on fire. My personal favorite post read, "Why are we paying dues if we can't even water our own grass? Is this a HOA or a scam?" At first, Janice tried damage control. She sent out a newsletter blaming temporary supply issues and urging conservation for the greater good. That lasted exactly 3 days before someone forwarded my cease and desist letter to the group chat. After that, the gloves came off. Residents started showing up at board meetings with printed screenshots, copies of my legal notices, and a surprising amount of profanity for such a classy neighborhood. Someone spray-painted "Free the Water" on the community tennis court. I almost sent them a fruit basket. Then came the desperate emails. Janice tried to negotiate, offered me $5,000 to settle this quietly. I responded with a revised invoice for the now accrued trespassing fines, over 40 days at $500 a day. $20,000, not including the water access fee. She didn't reply. But I knew the pressure was mounting. And just to twist the knife a little further, I installed a locked metal valve where the pipeline exited my property. I painted it bright red, bolted a warning sign to the fence, and slapped on a flow meter just for fun. I wanted them to see it, to know exactly where their problem was, and that I was the one holding the key. Residents started driving by to gawk. Some took photos. A few even waved. One guy stopped to ask if I was hiring. The HOA board, on the other hand, was noticeably absent. But then something weird happened. A few days after Mitch's visit, I got a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It wasn't from the HOA's legal team. It was from a firm representing a group of residents. Turns out, they were organizing a class action lawsuit against the HOA for mismanagement, failure to disclose project details, and unauthorized use of funds. And they wanted my cooperation. Now, I had no intention of becoming the poster boy for anti-HOA crusades, but the irony was too delicious to resist. I agreed to provide documentation, photos, even a sworn statement about the construction crew showing up uninvited. My only condition? My name stayed off any public filings until the dust settled. By midsummer, the HOA was imploding. Residents were calling emergency meetings. Janice had gone suspiciously silent. Rumors swirled that she was stepping down for personal reasons. Others said she was lawyering up. The board issued a statement saying they were reviewing the pipeline situation and considering alternative solutions, which was a bureaucratic way of saying, we screwed up and have no idea what to do next. Then I got another visit. This time it wasn't Janice or Mitch. It was two men in business casual, driving a black Lexus and carrying briefcases. They introduced themselves as representatives of a water management company, private contractors looking to purchase regional water access for upcoming developments. They'd heard about my land, my rights, and my control of the aquifer, and they were prepared to make an offer. That was the moment it all clicked into place. The HOA wasn't just building a pipeline for lawn care. They were trying to secure long-term water infrastructure that would boost property values, attract developers, and line a few pockets behind the scenes. Janice wasn't just overreaching, she was scheming. And she gambled everything on the hope that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, or wouldn't fight back. I smiled at the men from the water company and told them I'd consider their offer. Then I walked back to the porch, sat down, and stared at the metal valve gleaming in the sun. It wasn't just a shutoff switch anymore. It was leverage, and I was about to use it in a way none of them saw coming. It's funny how fast people change their tune when their property value starts drying up along with their front lawns. By the end of July, Willow Creek looked less like a suburban dream and more like a dried-up ghost town from a spaghetti western. Lawns were fried. Hedges withered. Pool pumps sat idle and useless, while inflatable flamingos sagged in puddles of despair. The HOA had gone from boastful newsletters to radio silence, and the residents were no longer whispering behind closed doors. They were marching up to the clubhouse with pitchforks, or, more accurately, with invoices, legal threats, and scorched patches of dead grass as Exhibit A. Janice finally cracked. It wasn't dramatic or televised like I would have liked, but the resignation email she sent to the community was satisfying enough. Full of vague language about needing to focus on family and trusting the next board to move the project forward. Not a single mention of the pipeline, the lawsuit, or the fact that she'd essentially bet the entire neighborhood's water supply on an illegal trench across private property. But her resignation did come attached with one last, desperate plea, to resolve our current water situation through cooperation and mutual respect. That part had me cackling into my morning coffee. The new interim HOA board, a haggard group of volunteers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, reached out to me within 48 hours. No more posturing, no more thinly veiled threats. Just a straightforward message: we want to make this right. What will it take? I responded the same way I had before, with the same offer. $250,000 and a formal apology read aloud at the next HOA meeting, on video, with no edits or creative reinterpretations. I even offered to waive the trespassing fines if they agreed quickly. Courtesy, really. They didn't laugh this time. After some back and forth, their lawyer finally called mine to confirm. They were ready to pay. It took 2 more weeks to draw up the contract, which included clauses so airtight I think my attorney got a little misty-eyed reading them. They'd pay the full amount, acknowledge fault, guarantee no future construction on my land, and make the video apology public on the HOA's website for no less than 6 months. I added one final clause, mostly for my own amusement, a decorative plaque to be placed at the edge of my property, visible from the walking trail, reading private property. Water rights enforced. The apology video was everything I hoped it would be. The new HOA president, a man named Doug who looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks, stood in front of a cheap podium while reading the statement with the enthusiasm of a man passing a kidney stone. He acknowledged the unauthorized construction, the misuse of property, the violation of my rights, and thanked me, through clenched teeth, for my patience and willingness to resolve the matter amicably. I watched it twice, once for satisfaction, once for the sheer comedy of it, and then the money hit my account. $250,000. Taxable, sure, but still more than enough to make some upgrades around my place. I installed a new solar grid, upgraded my water storage tanks, and even paid a local artist to paint a mural on the side of my storage shed. It featured a cartoon version of me, standing heroically with crossed arms in front of a busted pipeline. Above it, in bold letters, "Don't mess with surveyors." Below that, "Property lines are not suggestions." But the best part wasn't the money. It was the ripple effect. With Janice gone and the class action lawsuit still hanging over the HOA's head, more stories started surfacing. The Harpers came forward quietly, through a lawyer, revealing the details of their settlement and the bullying they faced. Several other residents discovered easement issues that hadn't been disclosed when they bought their homes. Some started attending city council meetings, demanding oversight. Willow Creek's reputation, once pristine and picture-perfect, was now attached to phrases like land dispute, unauthorized construction, and gross mismanagement. Realtors started lowering their listing prices. Developers backed out of expansion deals. One even tried to reach out to me directly, only to learn that I had declined every offer with a polite but firm, "I don't do business with thieves." Meanwhile, the water company reps who'd shown up earlier circled back. With the HOA's mess now public, they knew I was the only stable access point to the aquifer in the area. They offered a long-term lease agreement, significantly more profitable than a one-time sale, guaranteeing me monthly passive income for years. And because I held senior rights, I could set the terms. I negotiated fair access for local farmers and co-ops as a condition. In the end, I walked away with income, leverage, and a clean conscience. The HOA, meanwhile, walked away with dead lawns, a massive financial loss, and a hard lesson in why you don't build pipelines on land you don't own. One afternoon, while I was finishing up repairs on my fence, a familiar SUV rolled up. I recognized it immediately, Janice's luxury tank. But instead of the Queen herself, it was her daughter behind the wheel. She stepped out awkwardly, a little embarrassed, and offered me a box of cookies. Apparently homemade. Apparently an apology. I took them, said thank you, and left the box untouched on the porch for the birds. I'm all for forgiveness, but I'm not dumb. As the summer faded, things started to quiet down. The pipeline remained in place, now legally permitted and under my strict conditions. The neighborhood slowly recovered, grass growing back under tighter restrictions and wiser leadership. I noticed fewer scowls and more sheepish waves when residents drove by. A few even stopped to thank me, not just for the water, but for standing up to a system they felt powerless against. And me? I kept doing what I always did. Surveying, maintaining my land, drinking coffee on my porch. Only now, I did it with a little more money in the bank and a whole lot more peace of mind. I had proven that with a sharp mind, a steady hand, and just the right amount of sarcasm, One guy could take on a whole HOA and come out on top. But every now and then, I'd walk down to the edge of my land where the pipeline valve sat, locked and secure, and give it a gentle pat. A reminder to myself, and to anyone watching, that control doesn't come from shouting the loudest or pushing people around. It comes from knowing exactly where the lines are drawn and daring anyone to cross them. And just in case they forgot, the plaque was right there to remind them. Water rights enforced. Always.